The fellow we talked about up on the Golan Heights, who comes to know the Lord through that conversion experience on the road to Damascus, becomes the grand spokesperson, a powerful witness to the testimony of Jesus. And he is so dynamic and so effective, we would think this is a guy you just got to leave loose, keep him off the leash. And what's so striking is in the book of Acts, about verse 23, we see him arrested in Jerusalem, charged, and then brought down here for trial in this building above us here. And what is particularly striking, I mean, the label, he was brought and kept in Herod's palace at Caesarea. I mean, that's one of those times when you really just come to a pretty strong X marks the spot, given the archaeology of the palace just above us here. But the most striking thing that follows is that he was kept here for 2 years. And you got to say, whoa, that seems off the grid unusual. Why would you lock someone that dynamic and effective down in this space under house arrest for 2 years? And the best answer I've come to has to do with Caesarea again. What Paul was being prepared to do was to take the kingdom of God to the very core of Europe, to Rome itself. And of all the things that Paul knew and had experienced, most of them had to do with his Jewish training and the training that he had received from Jesus as the one who would become the apostle to the Gentiles. What Paul did not have firsthand experience with was how people did business, how people listened, how people would interact with him when he got to Europe in general and Rome in particular. And so I think the Lord allows for this 2-year extended stay here at Caesarea because, as I said before, this is Rome away from Rome. If you want to figure out how people do their politics, how they do culture, how they do religion, if you want to become conversant in the vocabulary of people from Europe, how can you do that without plunging right into the heart of Europe? Well, you come to Caesarea. And I think that may be the best explanation. Well, I know it's the best explanation I've got for why it would be that Paul would be left here for those 2 years. But that era comes to an end, and I'm going to go to Acts chapter 24-27 to pick this story up. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. Those are labels associated with two governors akin to Pilate. So we've got two governors, Felix and Festus. Remember, they're responsible for judicial matters, keeping the peace, tax collection. They are going to be out here in Caesarea. 2 years had passed. Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." After spending 8 or 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea, and the next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, and they brought many serious charges against him, but could not prove any of them. Then Paul made his defense. "I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law, or against the temple, or against Caesar." That's a pretty comprehensive statement of innocence. At every level, he was at risk. If he had violated Jewish law and had caused social unrest, he could be charged by Rome with creating civil disturbance. If he threatened the temple, he was violating one of the premises of Roman occupation, which was Rome would protect the temple in Jerusalem. And if he was charged with sedition against Caesar, that's going to land him. So he picks off every one of the charges that might impinge on him. I've done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, "Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges?" Paul answered, "I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." And he just threw down the big card that a Roman citizen had, which was to escape provincial governors and their judicial system to have the case heard before the highest court in the European world, before Caesar in Rome. I appeal to Caesar is an official, legal, right, Mike, statement that says, it's not get out of jail free, it is where how would you say it, Mike? It's where the trial is going to be heard? Yeah, so it's moving it from provincial Roman governor to emperor in Rome. After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, "You've appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you will go." And so from this seaport, Paul is boarded on a ship, and now we read the story as it goes on in the closing chapters of Acts, as that vessel leaves this port and heads out to Europe. I suspect what Paul thought he might be doing is going out to create the argument for a separation between Judaism and Christianity. This became a bit of an issue after 49 AD. In 49 AD in Rome, the Emperor Claudius issued a decree that banished Jews for a time from Rome itself. And the reason for that banishment, Suetonius, the Roman author, says, was because there was a disagreement among them over a man by the name of Chrestus, Chrestus. That's how Suetonius spells it. It would appear that there was a debate about Jesus referred to by Suetonius as Christus, and that resulted in a problem for the Jewish Christian church. Up until this time, the Jewish Christian church had sort of resided underneath the licensure, if you will, of the Jewish religious religion. In Rome tended to recognize indigenous, broadly practiced religion in the provinces. They gave them license to practice. You couldn't just organize and meet together unless you had such license. Rome was always concerned you were plotting together in order to do harm to the government. And so for the early years of the church, it sort of resided under that umbrella and took advantage of the fact that Roman leadership was not recognizing a distinction between Jewish believers in Jesus and other folks who were Jewish in their religious views without the addition of Jesus. They simply viewed them as two different sects. But once you get to 49 AD, now with the Claudius decree that banished Jews from Rome for a time, you begin to see Rome treating everybody the same, but in a way that's harmful to the early church. So I think that Paul was maybe in part planning to go to Rome in order to advocate for a licensure for the early Christian church. If that was his intention, it never came about, so far as we know. The first time we see that happening is 312 AD, the Edict of Milan, issued by Constantine. That's the time when Christianity within Rome gets that licensure together. In any event, you can see again, this is a place that began to fundamentally change the church, both as a consequence of the experiences of Peter here and the experiences of Paul here, who's acquiring a better understanding of the pagan Roman world, its vocabulary, its worldview, so that when he goes to Rome and enhances the church at Rome, that he has a chance to better understand the language that would be required for him to do that. So Caesarea stories in sum don't appear at first blush to read